Good Shabbos. I hope you had a Zisen Pesach, a sweet Pesach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We have this week the Parsha is Shemini. It's in Leviticus 10 and 11, and there is a lot in it. There's so much to talk about this week. There's a lot in the Parsha, including laws of purity around the temple and laws of kashrut, and suggests that perhaps there's a relationship between them. Keeping kosher is somehow an echo or an extension of the laws of purity in the temple. And that means that somehow, when the act of keeping kosher is somehow perpetuating the holiness of the temple, perpetuating our roles as a holy nation, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, as Exodus says. There's a lot going on in that, and perhaps we can look at some of this in Hebrew and Brews, even though that might belong to next week's Parsha. Hebrew and Brews coming up this week. But this is both relevant and deeply theoretical at the same time. We're coming off of Pesach and standing before Yom HaShoah at this time. Coming off of Pesach, and Pesach begins a journey for us. Perhaps you've heard me say this. It begins a journey. Pesach is the night that we are escaping that plague of the angel of death, the firstborn. The angel of death passes over, and then the next morning we leave Egypt. Liturgically, on the Jewish calendar, on the 7th day of Passover, that is when the sea splits. We pass through the sea, and then we're in the wilderness. We wander until we reach Sinai at Shavuot. 40 days after Shavuot is the fast of Tammuz.
Room here in Mission Control as voice communication.
Is the fast of Tammuz. And that is the moment in tradition when Moses comes down 40 days later and we encounter the golden calf. And then sometime later, actually the rabbis say the 1st of Elul, a month before Rosh Hashanah, Moses goes up again. And that is already an act of forgiveness on the part of God. Moses goes up again the second time. 40 days later is Yom Kippur. That's when we receive the second set of tablets, forgiveness. So it's a journey. And before I continue, I do want to mention that humanity is on a little bit of a journey today. I do want to mention that at 8:07, which might be about now, there is a scheduled splashdown of a crew that has gone around the moon. First time that has happened in 50 years or so. And too many people have begun to take that for granted, but it is absolutely astounding. I do want to recall, however, that the journey we're on together liturgically is astounding also. And as I was preparing for Passover, I found a meditation on Passover that I wrote some time ago, but I barely remembered. And I thought maybe if I barely remembered, maybe you barely remembered also. I wanted to read this. one of the found things I'm bringing tonight. On Seder night, we start on a journey together. Every year on this night, we start on this journey, and each year it is the same but different. The words of the Haggadah describe the contours of our travels, but the details of our lives provide the content, just as the rituals of the Seder remain the same, but the mix of people sitting around our Seder table may change from year to year. The Haggadah tells us that on Seder night, we will begin to leave Mitzrayim, Egypt. You may already know that the letters that spell Mitzrayim also spell Mitzarim, which means from the straits or from the narrow places. So when we say that each year we should think of ourselves as if we personally came out of Mitzrayim, we are saying that each year we are given the opportunity to come out of some place of narrowness. What that narrowness is depends on the state of our lives together and of each of our lives individually. Each year we confront things that constrict us or box us in, reducing our ability to breathe freely or to maneuver. It may also be that we are afflicted with some narrowness of the mind. It may be that we cannot see all the possibilities before us or the potential in others. By contrast, Jewish tradition teaches a wider way of seeing things. When we envision a divine spark within everyone and within everything, and we declare in the Shema that God is one, we are saying, in effect, that everything is interconnected. We acknowledge that all the details we see around us are part of one larger unity. On a smaller scale, anything that happens inside of us affects what happens outside of us, and anything that happens outside of us affects what happens inside of us. On a larger scale, anything that happens in one part of existence affects every other part of existence. Once we see this and really know it in our minds and in our hearts, it becomes impossible to remain within a narrowness of mind. The command to love your neighbor as yourself, and the further command in Leviticus to love the stranger as yourself, makes perfect sense, because now we see that we are part of our neighbor, and our neighbor is part of us. We see the wideness of the world. It is important that we walk this path in community, because all around us, the narrowness calls us back. Most people, most of the time, never see the wideness, the interconnection of everything. For anyone to remember the wider truth requires work and effort to cultivate a habit of thinking. This is why we are called to affirm this unifying truth every year at Passover, and every day when we recite the Shema. And it is why we need community, so we can remind each other. Moving on our journey, maybe I should say moving on my journey this week, I had a very unusual experience over this past Yontif, the last 2 days of Passover. I went to visit my parents and stay with them for Yontif. And about 2 or 3 weeks ago, going through papers, I found yet something else in my house, in my filing cabinet. I didn't even know it was there. I knew of its existence, but I didn't know they were there. I found a set of correspondence. I found 4 or 5 letters between my grandmother, possibly grandmother and grandfather, and my grandmother's parents, my great-grandparents, and my grandfather's half-sister, who we didn't even know about until we found letters after my grandparents had died. This was the last set of correspondence, one of the last, but maybe the last set of correspondence between my grandparents, specifically my grandmother and her parents. Last set of correspondence. My grandparents, this is 1940, my grandparents were in New York. My great-grandparents were in Vienna, Germany. And they had already been moved to what in the letter is called a home before they were ultimately moved to Riesenstadt, where they died. The letter was clearly censored, the pencil mark of the censor saying that they had looked at it, and pieces cut out where the censor did not want the communication to be completed. And then there were carbon copies of letters that my grandmother sent back. My grandmother was a trilingual secretary, German, English, French, and, by the way, Esperanto. And she kept carbon copies of all her letters. So this correspondence. And my mother has a friend who was born in Germany during the war and who was a scholar of literature. And she offered to translate these letters for us. So 2 days ago, we went over to her home and we sat down and we read these letters. And my mother said, and I concur, something to the effect of it's the first time that she ever met her grandparents. It was quite something to be able to encounter something of these people, something of their personality, as they were interacting with their daughter, son-in-law, brother, talking about the family, and asking about the granddaughter, my mother. So in every generation, a Pharaoh rises up against us in some way. And every year I ask in the prison, I ask inmates, is it possible to be free when you're incarcerated? And every year I get a resounding yes from them. So somehow we have to embrace our freedom in all of this. I also came across this book just before, it was in my office, just before starting the service tonight. I have this book in my office because I was thinking of sending it to the Jewish Museum in Poland, Western Austria, where there are no Jews, just a museum. But this was created by another friend of my parents in Greenbelt, Maryland. Actually, it was not created by them, it was published by them. They inherited it. It's called In Memory's Kitchen. And this was a cookbook that our friend's grandmother and perhaps others wrote in Theresienstadt by memory of recipes that they weren't able to cook at that point, but it was a way of holding on to who they were. The introduction cautions you not to depend fully on the recipes. Certain things were forgotten, left out. The recipes weren't tested, but the cookbook was written. And maybe someday we should have a feast. We should adapt. We should maybe correct some of the recipes that need. We should perhaps cook some of these foods in celebration of who these people were and who they continue to be in memory. At the synagogue which I attended with my parents yesterday, where we said Yizkor, they read from a memorial scroll. They happened to have one of the first Holocaust scrolls that were distributed to congregations. That were collected by the Nazis and left with the Jewish Museum, or after the war were left in a warehouse in Czechoslovakia for many years until the Czech government decided maybe they could sell them and get some hard cash. The synagogue in Westminster, synagogue in Britain, bought them, all 1,500 Torah scrolls, and they're now owned by a foundation that has repaired many of them and placed them into synagogues. And Mishkan Torah in Greenbelt received one of the first ones that were distributed, and so they read from the memorial scroll. And indeed, it did remind me of our non-kosher scroll downstairs that I keep on thinking we can use for educational purposes. It's non-kosher because some of the patches that were in the parchment, on the parchment, have fallen off, and so there's a hole and we can't put the letter in. But in fact, that scroll that we read from yesterday, at Mishkan Torah, had many patches like that. The parchment looked very similar. It was the same size. It's a very big scroll. And the number of rows per column are not the standard that we see these days. It's not only my judgment that our Torah looks very similar to that memorial scroll. In some discussions and correspondence I've had with the director of the Memorial Scrolls Trust, he asked me to send pictures of our scroll, and I did. He showed it to a sofer in London who told us that it is a Bohemian scroll. They estimate that it was written somewhere between 1700 and 1750. And that does follow from also somewhere in my memory from some of the times I've been here over the past 36 years, somebody told me that scroll came to us from Pittsburgh and did somehow survive the Holocaust. So maybe that is one of the scrolls they placed somewhere and got misplaced, because some of those scrolls that they did place early on did get misplaced because the people in the synagogues changed and they didn't remember that they had a Holocaust scroll, and sometimes they even decided to bury it because it looked so worn out. So that is why the Memorial Scrolls Trust does programs now with their scrolls in synagogues where they are. But that means also our scroll downstairs is something that we should remember to embrace. So all of these things are found and poignant. I thought they were all poignant pieces for post-Pesach meditation and the week where we move forward towards Yom HaShoah, which is this Monday night and Tuesday. We will be starting the reading of names, and we will be reading names. Our synagogue, will be reading names on Zoom for that 24-hour reading in the middle of the night, starting at something like 10 o'clock, I believe. So I wish everyone a meaningful journey as we continue on our way towards Sinai. And we count the Omer. And once services are over, we will check to see how the astronauts are. And yes. So, Shabbat Shalom.